Today we're going to be talking about cold and heat therapies. My name is Matt Gluckman, and I'm with Eric Menchie. We are co-hosts of Think Fitness Life, a movement dedicated to mindset, exercise, nutrition to give you all the tools you need to be your best, to be your own personal trainer and live your best life. I'm over here really cold. No, I'm just kidding. But um, the main thing about heat and cold therapies is there's a lot of science that plays into it. Historically speaking, we had periods where we were really cold and periods where we were really hot. And now we understand more of the science and nuances of what that's doing in our body. And we want to go ahead and talk to you about the different ways that you can use this to enhance your performance and your longevity. So take it away, Eric.
So I've been getting a lot of questions in the recent days. So one of my clients did one of the ice bath, cold plunge, and then went into the infrared sauna. And you had
Like right
posted
after it?
yesterday.
Okay.
Yesterday, you had posted about being out in the cold exposure, and just being in nature. And it kind of really sparked this thought in my head. Okay, well, I think people understand a little bit why it's good, but don't really understand fully like the mechanisms of how these things work and why they're really beneficial. People just think, oh, sauna's relaxing, which it very much is, but don't understand the benefits of it. And then on the other side, there are a lot of people on Instagram and I'm sure on TikTok that are jumping in these ice barrels. And Wim Hof is doing it or has been doing it, cold exposure, and understanding why people are doing that and how it can benefit longevity and life. And like that's usually kind of how it things start to stem thoughts in my head of things I want to talk to or address as a whole. And it's very misconstrued because we were talking before the show, kind of going over our notes and stuff of, well, you don't really have to be in this high end spa and sauna. And there has been spas and saunas on this earth for a very long time. The Romans had them. Probably most famous is I think what's like the Nordic or the Finnish or Swedish. Their saunas are like one of the most well known, and there's certain aspects to them, and they've been done for thousands of years. But you really don't have to have all that fancy high tech technology or go to a sauna every day. Now, if your gym has one or you have the availability to, I think that's the most important thing. But kind of to understand the premise behind it. And I think, Matt, where do you want to start? Cold or hot? You take a pick.
I say we start with hot because it's probably been around more mainstream, more recent, longer. And I think most people understand it in terms of the studies that have been around with the sauna in terms of Alzheimer's, type 2 diabetes, arthritis, right? Like that's how we understand the sauna. But I think just starting there is really helpful because most of us have been through periods where we're extremely hot and sweating and whether it's from the sun or you're in like a hot spring or in a hot tub, it's stimulating similar responses in the body. So let's go ahead and talk about that.
Yeah, so with hot is always a good thing. So, or it's hot or called hyperthermic conditioning. There's many benefits to this. Now, usually when I start asking people what their like recovery modalities are, I kind of ask to see, okay, if you do a sauna or steam room. Now, steam rooms are still very beneficial in opposite ways, but the issue is some of them don't get hot enough to elicit a very big hormesis effect. And we're going to talk about this word a lot. And Matt, I know that's one of your favorite words. You've been talking about that for years of, eating things to induce hormesis and all this other, which all is just an external stress that adds adaptation onto a system.
Yeah, hormesis is just the act of little bouts of stress so that your body can overcome them. It's like vaccines. The purpose of a vaccine is to let your body build up antibodies so that when it's next time that it's the virus or the sickness is present, your body already knows how to create those antibodies and it happens more reactively, and your body's more uh, ready, right? I mean, there's a classic line that coincides with this whole concept of we don't we don't rise to the occasion, we fall to our highest level of preparation. And that's what we're trying to do to our body. We're trying to create better instincts with our body. So when we can readily um, you know expose ourselves to little bits of stress, we're going to make ourselves better through time. That's another classic line of it never gets easier, you just get better. That's not that like the world around us gets easier as we age. It's the fact that we actually get better as we age, and that's what makes things easier. But yeah, hormesis is a favorite term of mine. But another one that comes along with these heat therapies specifically is autophagy. We can talk about both of those, but I think the big thing here is, um, you don't need to. I don't know. I get the idea of sauna and cold plunges, but you don't need to go out and buy a sauna to do this stuff. You don't need to buy an expensive cold plunge tub to do all this stuff. You can get all these benefits like autophagy and hormesis. These are just concepts that our body can take hold from, and there's many different ways to get that effect. When it comes to improving our body on a cellular level, though, autophagy is really only stimulated through extreme temperature changes, basically forcing our body into a corner and saying, deal with this scenario, or fasting. So a lot of times, what we want to do is just have various different stimuli that are making our body uncomfortable, and that's just diversifying our health portfolio, so to speak.
Yeah, and with the bring up the use of like outdoor temperatures and exposure always comes with caution first, right? If especially when we're talking heat, cold, same thing, but if you're in an area that has cold, your body's going to tell you kind of when you're cold and needs to warm up. Heat, you got to be very careful. If it's 100 degrees out, yes, you can go out in it. It doesn't have to be direct sunlight, but you have to understand, or with any heat like a sauna, you need to stay hydrated and you can't stay out forever, right? We're talking hormesis is small dosage. So for heat and sauna use, it's like 30 minutes to an hour. And at first, that's a lot for people. We're talking about if we're talking about being in a sauna or being out in the heat, but it does induce an effect, right? As we talk about it, the mechanisms that work is in the cold, you got to drop your body temperature by at least 2 degrees to start seeing an effect. Same thing, heating up, you're going to raise your core temperature and elevate it to induce the effects. And that's what we're looking for. So if people always stay in this like baseline, hey, I want to stay comfortable, I don't want it too hot, too cold, like you're not really inducing your body to stressors that's going to change it. And with heat comes saunas, infrared saunas. We'll talk about more of that rather than steam rooms, but that's still a heat that can bring benefits. But more or less, we're going to talk about it from a sauna standpoint, which you're going to increase overall blood flow and increase more nutrients to the blood, which is going to increase endurance, right? So that's a big thing. You get more blood flow, more nutrients to the cell, your overall endurance is going to increase, whether you're getting blood to the heart, to the skin, everywhere else through that. With that is shown also to be an increase of glycogen stores from 40 to 50% of being in a sauna or being in heat.
Huh. Interesting. I didn't know that one. I
So
do
it
know
also
that.
it
Oh,
works
sorry,
on
go ahead.
insulin. So it does improve insulin sensitivity, right? Per our last one. And that's, there's certain mechanisms that it's going to allow these cells to upregulate and take in increased enzyme activity. Heat increases enzyme activity. Cold
Mhm.
slows enzyme activity down. So when you're heating things up, just like you were to heat up water, molecules are starting to bounce off each other very fast.
Mhm.
Enzymes are going to speed things up really quick.
So I know that you know they say the extreme heat in the sauna, fasting stimulate autophagy, but specifically with heat, they talk about heat shock proteins that help with
Mhm.
autophagy. Tell us a little bit more about these heat shock proteins. Are they like something that's dormant in our body, and like the switch is only flipped when we get to a certain stress point in terms of heat. Is that correct?
Yep, same thing with cold. So we'll get to cold in a couple minutes, but the shock proteins are there as like yet again a survival mechanism. If things are too hot, things start shutting down. Too cold, things start shutting down. And we're talking extreme heat. You go too far on the heat spectrum, your body will start cooking, and your enzyme activity is really going to slow down because your body can't support that. So what these heat shock proteins do, they react to this level of hormesis and they say, okay, well, that this level of heat, we're going to in turn increase protein synthesis through certain heat shock proteins in certain genes to upregulate more of a survival aspect of the body. So with heat, you're going to increase antioxidants. Specifically, one of the big ones is glutathione, which is going to repair damaged protein cells. So the heat is going to, or anything which is going to create damage to protein cells or cells, DNA, are reactive oxygen species. That's what starts oxidizing in our body and creating damage to cells. And a lot of things we know do that. So when we add this heat, it increases activity of heat shock proteins with it, which is hormesis, repairs the damage of the cells at a higher rate. So that's what we're looking for when we want to stimulate these shock proteins, is to increase their activity. Now, this is
And it,
completely different than like muscle or exercise because that doesn't stimulate it. It's certain stimulus need to adapt. Like shock protein is like you need to have a great stimulus of that heat on the body to activate these proteins.
and it's pretty cool because they almost kind of happen at the same time, right? The heat shock proteins happening at the same time the autophagy is happening. So it's like the extreme, our exposing ourselves to extreme heat is turning on two pathways. One that's saying, let's see if we can fix everything, and another one that's saying, well, if we can't, we're going to have to cycle these out and get rid of the waste. Anything that's old or needs to be destroyed or anything that's already damaged. So it reminds me of like spring cleaning, like when I clean out my closet and I think of things that like I want to keep and fix or things that I want to get rid of, So it's the same thing that happens to your body, and I think it's so fascinating because so many times do we temperature control everything in our lives, with our car, with our place of work, with the place that we reside. And it's like, as we get older, we become so sensitive to these little changes in temperature because our body is overly stressed in these minor changes in temperature. So to be proactive and improve your longevity and improve your body's performance in these temperature changes is like anything else, just to get your body prepared for it. Again, you don't rise to the occasion. You fall to your highest level of preparation. So you have to be incorporating this type of uh, we'll say it modality, training modality into your routine if you want to think about the quality of your life and the quantity of your life. Now the kicker is so many times people pick up on a new thing they need to incorporate their routine, and they become a little bit too uh, hyper vigilant about it, right? Like, okay, autophagy is something that I want to do. Now that's their main focus, and all they do is sit in the sauna every day for hours and hours, and they think they need to do it every single day, all year long. In reality, that's not even how we lived our lives. We went through periods of extreme hot and extreme cold, and that's how we want to do things. Almost the cyclical nature of nature itself. So your periods where you're getting the benefits from heat and the periods that you're getting benefits from the cold can happen all in the same year and don't need to happen within the same day for your body to really take hold of these changes and become a stronger organism.
Right. And at the end of it, right, it's always like we're with this, whether it's, enhancement, you're looking to make the body more efficient. So you're literally adding more antioxidants to improve function. And you're creating the deformed cells or the non-optimal cells to be get killed off and get in the body, you literally get rid of them. So you're dealing with that oxidative stress and you're building a better defense system over time. And that's what one of these aspects of these heat shock protein do. The other one with the sauna is you're going to get protein synthesis increase through those, but also hormones like growth hormones going to increase dramatically depending on how long you're in there for. If it's 20 minutes, you're going to get twofold, but if you're in there for an hour, it's 16-fold. And that's a huge increase of growth hormone, which just still leads to the increase of protein synthesis of creating better, stronger cells with these heat shock protein cells. And it all comes kind of full circle with each other, that you're improving insulin sensitivity, but you're increasing in growth hormone, which they kind of bounce off each other, right? Growth hormone induces like growth, which is going to allow the receptors to deal with insulin better and allow more muscle mass to be used and utilized, which is increasing glycogen stores, which is then increasing insulin sensitivity. So it's a win-win-win across the board. It's not just these mechanisms are happening separately. They're all tied together with that. And that's just at like a muscular level. We can start talking about the brain side of things, where you're going to get improved neurogenesis through heat, improved neuroepinephrine, which is focus and attention. So then you're going to get more new brain cells because of the heat and its effect on the brain. And it's going to release dynorphins, which is going to make you feel good. And a big thing with heat is, right, so, endorphins give you kind of that, the dysphoria, the runner's high, all that stuff. But the dynorphins are the different side of it, which is a different opioid, a different pathway that is, and it's going to give you a different sense of stress relief and relaxation. So that's the other
That's why
side.
you feel like very euphoric when you come out of the sauna.
Exactly. You're relaxed. The sauna is a very parasympathetic thing. Now, your body is going into sympathetics because it's hot, but once you get used to it, because you're creating vasodilation, it's more relaxing, a calming thing than compared to the ice bath, which is more of a sympathetic thing you're building up. But you're using these tools differently, and that's where I think people get confused. Like, they're not the same, because one, you're driving more parasympathetic. And I get out of a sauna, I'm like, oh, I could go for a nap. I'm like relaxed. I'm good. That's what I want out of a sauna, along with the other things with the heat shock proteins. But cold is a whole different thing. And I think that's important when people are starting to think about, okay, do I do saunas? And infrared saunas are good. Regular saunas are good. As long as the heat is usually, I say like 170 plus is great. Infrared saunas don't go that high because they generate a different kind of heat with that light. But as long as you're over, a lot of stuff that says like 140 degrees, you're going to get the benefit of that. The longer you stay in, the more you're going to reap the rewards. You don't have to stay in for an hour a day. Start off slow like anything else, 10, 20 minutes, build up the tolerance to it. And over time, you're going to realize that you'll get in there and it's not going to bother you as much, or it takes longer duration to get the effect because your body's adapting, because your body temperature is managing that. You're not like, it's not freaking out.
Yeah, so let's go ahead and like recap the benefits of heat, and then let's move into cold. We talked about how exercise increases protein synthesis, but the downside is it also causes degradation of proteins. So the benefits of using a sauna or getting extreme heat exposure, in your routine, in your yearly routine, so to speak, we activate your heat shock proteins, which help hormesis and autophagy. We talked about growth hormone, and we talked about improved insulin sensitivity, and then he talked about benefits to the neurotransmitters in the brain.
Mm-hmm.
That pretty much sums it up. Ready to move into cold?
Ready to move on to the cold. Everyone hates the cold.
Well, that's not necessary. Yeah. Probably most people are more likely to avoid being cold than hot, right? Most people would prefer to be on a beach than say in Alaska. But
Yeah.
Um,
Or if you see someone, hey, I'm going to drop you in 50 degrees of water, they're not going to like you very much.
yeah, that too.
And I
So
think that's where the cold is different, right? It's completely because now you're going from a relaxed parasympathetic, you're driving sympathetics up. And this is where I think we'll get into the end of like comparing if you want to do two back and forth, which way that you can pick depending on which outcome you want. But we'll get that to the end. So like the cold, as you were in your video, you were outside. How cold was it out there? Were you sub?
it was like 20, 30 degrees. It wasn't even
Yeah.
that bad. And it might have been even warmer than that. But I'm not going to lie. Like 2 weeks ago, I walked outside. It was like -10, and it was awful.
Mhm.
Awful.
And it's one where 20 degrees is still cold. For people, you might be outside, and you don't have to have no layers on, but you want to get that chill. You almost want to get to a point where you're shivering. And for cold, you don't have to be out there long term. There's been studies that people have been in cold for 2 to 3 minutes, and they're still seeing the benefits that we're going to go over of being exposed to cold. If you have an ice bath, or go to one of these places that do have it, many people aren't staying in for a long time. You'll build up over time to stay in them longer, but the benefits aren't going to be as they're the same depending on how long you are, right? Usually with cold, they've seen you get close to a certain time point, like you're not really going to get benefit from sitting in there cold for an hour. Whereas heat, it's a little bit different because the body reacts differently when it's cold, right? It will start slowing things down. So enzymes start to slow down when anything is cold, right? It starts to freeze, stuff slows. Besides lipids, so fat, those enzymes are upregulated, and this is where brown fat comes in. I'm sure not a lot of people have heard of brown fat, but they say, oh, babies have more brown fat, and there's white fat, brown fat, but you want to have more brown fat. It's better. It's more thermogenic. And the reason why cold exposure does that is it brings increase of mitochondria in adipose tissue. So it increases the like furnaces of fat cells in the fat cell itself. What that does, if you look at it cut open, like type 1 muscle fibers, it looks more darker than type 2 muscle fibers, is the mitochondria density. So you're seeing a denser mitochondria, which makes it look a browner tint than non. And when you do get this brown adipose tissue fat, it activates more of this non-shivering thermogenesis. So it creates heat for the body because the mitochondria are working. And what the cold does is it kind of uncouples the mitochondria to create this heat, which induces more mitochondria to be made as a survival mechanism to keep you warm. So
so
that I think that we'll break that's a heavy hitter in the cold one right there.
I mean, we're gonna need to do a whole separate live just talking about fats because yeah, that's a whole nother rabbit hole to talk about brown fats, white fats, beige fats. I think there's yellow fats. But yeah, the basic premise, right, is that brown fats are more associated with um, uh, health and
Mhm.
performance, and they're more of the fats that's like in between joints, supporting tissue there versus like stored fats on our belly. That's more white fat.
Well, and it could be, it also could be like, right, that's stored, but do you have the ability to, once you're at a certain body fat percentage, right, that if you expose yourself to this, that your fat is actually becoming more brown fat. And they've showed
It
that
can. Okay.
it can, yeah. So like with low body fat percentage, so say you're healthy, you're working out, you're dropping your body fat percentage and you're doing cold exposure, it's going to drop your percent body fat even more, but then it's going to switch that body fat to be more brown body fat to keep you warm, but also because you're becoming more metabolically efficient. So your fat stores are actually going, well, okay, we can have mitochondria and we can burn fat at a higher rate because this person needs it and they're doing this cold therapy. Well, they're also now burning more fat at rest, period. And I think that's where you want to get the body eventually, is to, like, you have good, because everyone needs fat stores, not a lot of fat stores. But then if you turn some of these fat stores and say, well, these fat stores have a lot of mitochondria, that means that they're just more of a furnace to be utilized in situations.
Interesting.
And hence why babies have a lot of brown fat. They come out very mitochondrial dense. It's going to keep them warm. Then I think, obviously, I got to look into this, but as we grow older, right? And if you don't use it, you lose it. As we don't use that much, that the fat cells are, well, it's too cost worthy to keep this. Let's flip this over or burn the fat. Fat's gone. You lose that kind of baby fat as you start to grow, and then inactivity, on exposure to other things as the environment. Oh, let's just add this white fat that is just excess body fat. I think you're right. That is a whole different topic for another live.
So the cold therapies help this side of things more than heat. Interesting.
Yep.
Interesting. That is fascinating.
So
It makes sense, right? Because it's like, well, fat is more of an insulator. So as we get cold, our body moves to make our fat denser, right? Because brown fat's denser than white fat.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty fascinating. So tell us about some of the ways that people practice these cold therapies.
So a lot of times,
You
cold
just did one
therapy.
recently, right?
Yeah. So I did the ice bath. I did one the other day. Or there's a couple of them called ice barrels on the market. It's basically like a cold plunge. You're jumping into, hey, it's like 45 to 50-degree water. Could be colder, but usually they keep it at that. A lot of times, if you're not used to it, you can't go too cold or sit there too long because it can induce hypothermia, or hypothermia. So you don't want to do that. But usually you go in, at first, if you're new to it, it's like 4 to 5 minutes. Sometimes I've sat in ice baths for up to 10 minutes. There's a lot of different effects for it. And I like to submerge full body first and then sit there with just the head. So my shoulders and everything else are down. That's one way to do it. Cryotherapy was another big way where you cover.
I did cryo, and it was like
So I've
120 seconds, and it was
yeah, it's
crazy
very
because
quick.
I've done
How
I've
is
done
that for you?
ice baths back in the day, like when we would just take a bunch of bags of ice and just pour it in a bathtub, and then like athletic training when they had the ice bath things. But
Mhm.
yeah, the cryo was a whole different experience because I I don't know, maybe just the fact that you're not really stepping down in any way. You're not like easing into it. It's like you just went from this 70-degree temperature controlled room to now you're standing in this in this encapsulated circle with your head over top, and they just turn it on and it just blasts you for like 120 seconds, and you are freezing. And it was like it felt like 10 minutes of my life passing by in front of my eyes, and it was actually really hard, but it's probably like the easiest way for people to just power through 2 minutes versus wrapping their head around powering through 10, 15 minutes. But I would say, in my personal experience, it is really easy to sit in an ice bath versus the cryo, in my opinion.
I would have to take your word for it because I've never done cryo, and I think it's on my list to do. But they also use a very lower temperature for cryo. Like they're going very, very negative cold because you're only in there 100 seconds.
Right.
Very much. So like if you were to like jump into the like Pacific Ocean way up by Alaska, like that water is like, I think it's like 32 to 35 degrees, and it drops your core temperature really quick. So that's the mechanisms you're looking for, is can you drop your body temperature by 2 degrees Fahrenheit or really quick to induce a hormetic effect. And either way works, but I do agree that you're sitting in an ice bath creates you can sit there longer and get used to it. And it also, on a mental aspect of it, we'll get into the brain pathways, but it teaches that like discipline to be uncomfortable in a situation that is very, very uncomfortable. So the first time, and no one's done it like you, I like to plunge into just full body of like shock that. but some people hit it first cold and they're getting a sense of it, and it takes them a while to ease in because it's that cold. The body is literally at first it's going to shunt blood out to the arms in the periphery to be like, I need to warm it up. But then as the vasoconstriction happens because you're so cold, the body literally says, okay, I need to push blood back to the vital organs to keep it there. Hence why when you see people or have heard people go into cold water, they lose dexterity because the blood flow is shunting back to make sure the brain, the heart, all these organs are staying warm. And that's one big aspect of it, of like a discipline aspect of it,
You said they
to
lose
be like, hey,
dexterity. Yeah.
yep, you'll start losing dexterity because like the blood flow is not going there because it's all putting it back into the cavity for vital organs.
Yeah, it's fascinating because I'll walk Porter outside in the cold, and it'll be like anywhere from 20 to 30. And if I'm making content on my phone, if I'm responding to people on my phone, it's like 10, 15 minutes before everything's super slow. If I need to maneuver anything on my phone, my hands are just super slow, and I can't really get that fine motor control that I need to.
Well, and
That's
that's
probably
the other pathway of that is we have these the hands and feet are the biggest cooling and heating things. So we have AVAs that are in our hands and feet, which transfer heat very rapidly. So if you go out and you try to use a phone, because these are doing it, you're gonna lose heat very, very quick through your hands. That's another mechanism. Like we get into cold water, you lose heat very, very quick. On
yeah.
the flip side, what they've also done in research is if someone's worked out, they say do a set of 10 of squats, they put their hand in cold water or their feet, like just that, they've recovered really quick because they've cooled their body really fast. Different topic, different day, but that's another reason why our hands and feet lose dexterity is because we have those channels that pass heat instantaneously through.
So, how should I incorporate these two modalities into my routine, and when should it be done?
So the big question usually is ice bath post practice or post workout. I'm sure you've done them. I've done them after a hot day. They'll say your legs feel great. And then people go back and forth and start arguing, okay, well, what's better, heat or ice? Do I get in an ice bath right after? Right after an exercise bout, if you're under an hour, research has shown that it blunts that recovery aspect. So you're not going to recover well, and it actually reduces a hypertrophy effect
Hmm.
because you want inflammation within that first hour.
Right. You want your body to,
So,
respond.
so right after a workout session or a training session, probably not the best. Now, sometimes like college athletes are listening, right after practice, we'd be at practice for 3 hours. We jump in and, the next day we feel great. That might be a little bit different because practice is like, I'm not really worried about hypertrophy effect. Like I'm worried about
Right.
recovery. I
Right.
might
Worry
decrease
about performance the next
a little
day.
bit,
Right.
but as from a pain aspect of it, in a neuro sense, it decreases that. Now, if you do want to use it post training, everything's got to be an hour post. If you do an hour post, it's the anti-inflammatory response is increased huge up to 72 hours post. And
Yeah.
they've shown after like plyometric workouts and strength workouts, if you've done cold after about an hour, you've increased the power on the next session. Heat is a little bit different. You can get away with it post because you're creating more vasodilation. So you're bringing more nutrients in. Your body's already heated up. So it's kind of just continuation of that. So post workout sauna or steam is not going to hinder anything. It'll increase that likelihood, but
And
cold's got to
usually
be.
help people to get parasympathetic sooner post workout.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Helps aid in recovery. And I'm glad you mentioned that because I was going to say, like, for a general pop, um, if you're trying to, just be healthy or be fit, lose a little bit of fat, you definitely can throw them in your weekly routine. I would say, again, I don't think it needs to be overdone. I would say like once a week is totally fine. And if you're like in the winter and you're doing more cold immersion for 6 months, once a week, that's totally fine that you might not sauna, because here, like when the summer rolls around, you'll get your sauna then, and you're still getting your body to improve these different systems and mechanisms in different layers at different times throughout the year. Uh, but I wholeheartedly agree. Like, if your goal is performance, if you're an athlete, then absolutely you want to be using this stuff on a daily basis, because it's going to just boost your ability to recover, essentially. And like Eric said, like an hour after you've had a tough workout, if you go lay in an ice bath, like if you were, yeah, whatever, if they had a UFC card last night, if you had just fought and you know, 25 minutes essentially getting beat up, totally, I'd have you in an ice bath that later that night. It's going to just aid in recovery and blood flow and reducing inflammation and reducing bruise points and reducing any damaged ligaments and tendons. Um, so it just depends on the extreme use of your body to how much you need something like this in your system. For the general person who just cares about general health and fitness, like, just make sure they're thrown in sometime during the year, a couple times. I'd say, like, if you did cold exposure 4 times during your winter months, once a month for 3 to 4 months, you're going to be getting a lot of good benefits from that. If you wanted to really amp it up, once a week during the winter, and then same for heat as well. But I don't think it needs to be a hyper focused aspect. You still stick to the basics when it comes to exercise, sleep, and nutrition. Those are still going to be the bigger players that need to be dialed in before you just say, "Oh, I need to lose a lot of weight. I need to get healthy." These are not a day one modality. This isn't like, "Oh, I'm getting started. Let me just work on extreme heat and extreme cold," because they're not going to be the biggest bang for your bucks. This is going to be more training better instincts, more internal mechanisms that on the surface level, you might not even totally notice what benefits are happening. But if you are exercising regularly, if you are getting your sleep dialed in, if your nutrition's dialed in, then you add some of these modalities in, you're going to notice an improvement in your recovery. You're going to notice an improvement in your workouts, and you're going to notice improvements in deeper sleep. So I
Yeah.
think that's important to mention.
You could, right, if you could start to do some of the sauna stuff, say if you don't exercise and you're someone who's overweight and is on the edge of like metabolic syndrome or diabetes, you could go to sauna sessions and try to increase like insulin sensitivity through that aspect. Now, it's not going to be a cure. Like, we're not curing anything, but you could aid and help that. But it's got to be consistent, more or less. And like the other stuff that you mentioned are the heavy hitters. If you can do them all together, like that's the most important. The other thing I want to mention is, like, for cold, you can also do cold showers, and can be done early in the morning, like after 30 minutes of waking, or if you wake up and like, hey, you're gonna go to work and take a shower. So what it does is it increases your body temp compensatory, right? Because you're cooling your body temperature, and your body's got to react that to warm up and stay warm. That can also change your circadian rhythm to also affect if you want to go to bed earlier or change how you want to react the next day. But cold showers are also a great way to kind of start your day and wake up, because it will kind of shock the system. Now, you don't have to stay under a cold shower for long. It could be, a minute to 3 minutes, and also kind of wakes you up. It gets the system going for that day. That's another method to use. If you don't, most people have a shower. You don't need to have it freezing. It's just got to be cold enough to kind of shock the system or decrease overall just body temp.
Heck yeah.
Sauna's a little bit different. Hot showers won't get hot enough. And also, you don't want to burn like hot water on the skin. That's why I don't like to talk really about steam rooms, because if you crank the temperature too hot, you actually can burn yourself, because it's a moisture thing, and the moisture can be heat. But the other thing that people were asking me about, these places, one person said, "Oh, you got to do the sauna first, then the cold plunge," where I did the cold plunge first, then the sauna. And it kind of all depends on the mechanisms you want to work with. So Cold is sympathetic, sauna is parasympathetic. I chose to do the cold first, constrict everything. Then I wanted to go more parasympathetic, but really open up and get nutrients back into my body with the heat. You can 100% do it the other way. And I think the Swedish do it the other way. They do hot, then cold
Mm.
as a more of a big shock to the system, and then they re-warm up. So it does have its benefit either way. You're still going to get the benefits no matter what. It's just kind of what pathway do you want to go to? Do you want to stay more sympathetic? You do the cold after the heat, but you'll still capture the benefits of that.
Love it. Love it. Well, I think that about wraps us up for cold and heat therapies. Do you have anything else you want to add?
I am good.
Sweet. All right. Well, go Eagles. And stay tuned for our next lives. We'll be trying to get more organized and announcing topics ahead of time. But for now, just stay tuned on Sundays and Thursdays. We'll be having live, you know, YouTube lives, Facebook lives, live recordings. But then we'll also be posting them up as content later for those who can't attend those times. So thank you very much. Have a good rest of your Sunday. Go Birds.